So one of the most interesting trends in the last couple of years has been that of the wider gravel handlebar. I think it's fairly new, and a lot of people still haven't wrapped their heads around how it changes fit and reach and all that stuff. I've done a couple of videos kind of trying to show that there is a change and what that change is. But as you guys know, I am not a bike fitter, so I have enrolled the help of a friend of mine, Kevin Schmidt from Pedal PT in Portland. So Kevin, thank you for joining us today and helping us kind of think through this trend of wider gravel handlebars.
Yeah, totally. Great. Happy to help.
For those who aren't familiar with your business, can you just give us a quick sense of what you do and how long you've been doing it?
First and foremost, I'm a physical therapist. I've been a physical therapist for almost 20 years now. I own a business called Pedal PT, and it's kind of Portland's very first kind of bike-friendly physical therapy office. So we provide full service injury care as well as provide bike fit kind of on anything that can kind of come through the door, and that's gravel bikes, that's road bikes, that's recumbents, that's tandems, you name it. We always say if you can ride it, we will fit you to the bike. So yes, we've been doing that. We've been in business now 8 years, and so it's myself and there's actually 2 other physical therapists here with me as well. And just love it. Everybody here at the office rides a bike every day, so that's just kind of part of our office culture. So I'm actually the only one here at the office that actually owns a car. So it's kind of nice that we really try to practice what we preach, and just love helping cyclists and helping people. We always think it's I was a cyclist that was in pain way back in the day, and that's kind of what got me into bike fitting, is that I realized that maybe that bike fitting should be maybe for someone more in the body business versus the bike business, because most of the time when people are looking for bike fit, they're having issues with their body, they're having pain, they're having discomfort. So I just decided to combine healthcare with bike fitting and working with cyclists. So it's been a great time.
So what kind of insights do you guys have that a traditional bike shop that sends an employee to a fitting school might not have because of your PT background?
It all comes down to is that it's just a better understanding of where the pain is coming from, better understanding and the ability to, I always thought the funny joke that we always used to say was like, you're out and you twist your ankle. Who do you go see? Well, you go see the physical therapist, of course. Okay, you're out, you're throwing a ball and you hurt your shoulder. Who do you go see? Well, the physical therapist, right? Okay, I'm getting back pain. I'm getting back pain on the bike. Who do you go see? I'm going to go to the bike shop guy. I'm going to go to the bike shop employee. So I think it's just as us, we have just a better understanding where we have the ability to actually evaluate, actually treat pain, and to help riders and actually kind of figure out where the pain is actually coming from, and then be able to kind of work backwards kind of from that as to the true causes of that pain, and be able to apply that to bike fit. I think, no offense to any of the bike shop fitters out there, I think they're all great. They all have kind of the same generalized knowledge about fit principles, and we'll talk about those. What we have on top of that is we can actually understand and evaluate the body in just so much more depth, because a lot of times it's kind of a body issue as well as a bike issue. It's not just a bike fit issue. Equipment doesn't solve everything. And sometimes we have to be able to kind of take that down to the granular level to actually teach people exercises, what actually is good posture on the bike, that sort of thing. So we're able to kind of go in that angle, and we're actually able to get bike fit and helping cyclists get reimbursed through health insurance as well, which is kind of a neat perk for me too.
Well, today we're going to talk about this trend of wider gravel bars. I feel like it's kind of breaking a lot of I guess, traditional, fit knowledge that people may have. So things like, I remember when I first got into cycling, I was told that your drop bar should be no wider than your shoulders. Is that advice like that, is that based in more tradition, or is there actual science behind that?
Yeah, I think a lot of that is, and you have to understand that most of the bike fit knowledge that we're basing a lot of this stuff is based on road bike and the ability to be, what is the goal of road cycling? A lot of times that's speed, that's aerodynamics, that's less weight. So therefore, a skinnier, more narrow handlebar, a lighter weight handlebar is going to be much more, important to that road racer that's looking to shave time and speed. The width of the handlebar always used to be that you wouldn't want to go much wider than the width of your shoulders. Of course, with this whole new change in the gravel scene and the width of these bars, some of these bars are like, 67 centimeters. It's like the towel rack bar. Some of these are just kind of crazy. So that kind of adds a whole new element, but these are also bikes that are being manufactured for more upright positioning. So we can kind of start to throw a little bit of those, those generalized rule of like, you measure center of shoulder, add 2 centimeters, that's your perfect handlebar width. We can kind of start to play with that a little bit. And like I said, there are going to be extremes that we're going to find with that, but there's some pros and cons about going, maybe wider versus ultra wide too. So,
For sure. Well, let's talk a little bit about kind of the difference when you fit someone on a road bike as opposed to a mountain bike. And then I feel like gravel lands somewhere in the middle. So, road bike, mountain bike, they have widely different bars, yet, people can get a good fit on them. Like, what are the considerations for one versus the other?
A lot of times it just depends on symptoms the rider are having. A lot of your generalized where your saddle is going to be, how much of a bend at the knee, at the bottom, knee over pedal spindle, all those kinds of things are all going to be same. A lot of times we don't want the reach or the shoulders themselves. So if you're on the handlebar, you don't want your shoulders greater than 90 degrees when you're over the bike as well. All that's going to be applying to road bike as well as mountain bike. Mountain bikes just tend to be a little bit more upright anyway. The cockpit tends to be just a little bit closer and shorter. And so a lot of times when we're doing fit, a lot of your general parameters are going to be the same. A lot of times it's the symptoms that rider is going to experience. So a lot of times with mountain bicyclists, especially with full suspension mountain bikers, we're seeing a lot of wrist pain or hand pain as well. And a lot of times that comes from saddle being too high or sometimes saddle being a little nose down. And the reason that is hard to sometimes assess is that with full suspension, we have what's called sag. So the saddle itself, you look at the saddle on just standing there, and it might look like this, but then when they actually sit on that bike and that bike kind of sinks in, that will cause actually the nose to drop a little bit more. So they end up getting a lot more pressure through the wrists and hands and can lead to tingling numbness. So that's kind of one of the more interesting things that we tend to see with mountain bikers is it's actually more wrist, hands, shoulders, and knee pain, of course, and back pain. But for the most part, a lot of times, most of the mountain bikers we see is related to hand pain. Road bike is like I said, is a lot of times more about speed, especially if you're into race. So therefore, your reach, again, we still don't want your reach greater than 90 degrees at the shoulders. And this will be something that will change as we start kind of getting into gravel with the bars, how reach will change a little bit on you as well. But the parameters for the most part are kind of the same. It's all just depending on what can that rider tolerate as far as flexibility. So for a road cyclist that wants to come in with a very high saddle and that stem slammed all the way down to the ground, we have to look at them, and they're also experiencing back pain. Is that sometimes we have to kind of say, well, the bike looks great, but we have to be able to fit that to you're actually able to achieve that position, tolerate that position, and have the flexibility for it. So that's kind of how we do that. So
Talk about this wider gravel bar trend. I did a couple of videos trying to just explore if there was a change in reach, and what I discovered is, one, there is. And I was operating under the assumption of if you have a fit that you like, you should try to match that reach with a wider bar. I mean, I don't know if you saw the videos, but what do you think of the findings and how does it play out in what you've seen so far?
Yeah, totally. And like I said, I have not gotten a chance to watch your video,
Okay.
so I know we're talking about this a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like I said, the wider the bar goes, it's going to change your reach, and it's actually going to make you reach farther. So what can that do? So as we start getting our hands wider and wider, that of course is causing us to reach further from the center or from the tip of the saddle out. What can that do? Well, the wider that we go, what we sometimes will tend to see is that you will notice sometimes you can get, I guess the possibilities is you would get wrist issues. So if your hands are out wide and now the wrist, a lot of times when we are riding, sometimes we start to get fatigued. And what ends up happening a lot of times with a wide bar, let's say somebody comes in with a road bar and it's too wide for them. Let's say it's a smaller female that needs to, probably be on a bar that's 38 or something. They're on like a 44 bar. A lot of times what they're going to do is they're going to roll their hands inside. You're going to kind of let the hands roll inside. And what that does is it tends to put a little bit more torque on the wrist itself. So you can sometimes kind of get wrist on either kind of the pinky side or the thumb side, as well as sometimes pressure right on kind of that where that ulnar nerve comes through. So you can sometimes kind of get tingling and numbness. And that just comes from the body's wanting to be a little bit more narrow. Sometimes if they're not quite strong, the wider the bar goes, the more that you have to rely on the chest and the shoulder muscles to hold you up as well. The further that we reach apart, it's kind of, just imagine like doing a push-up. You're pushed up, you're at shoulder width, you can kind of do that, start getting a little wider. The further out you go, the more it relies on your chest and your shoulders to stabilize that. So that is the same thing that can happen on the bike as well. If we're reaching too far and we start getting too far and too far out wide, then ultimately our shoulders are going to be reaching kind of past 90 degrees. And therefore we have a great chance of the possibility of getting kind of neck pain, kind of those upper shoulder pain a little bit as well too. But it just, fit is just such a unique thing of how you change one thing, because sometimes saddle position that can put too much weight to hands. But if the wider the bar, the more you're going to have to transfer more weight to the front, which has benefits as far as like stability. Bikes with higher trail, things like that, you need a wider bar. That's actually beneficial. And I think the reason wide bars became such a popular thing now is mostly because of the bike packing and the ability to put like a Fabio's chest or something gigantic on the front to keep that nice and wide. But yeah, most of the time it'll be wrist pain, hand symptoms. Also, you can sometimes kind of develop inside of elbow pain. That's another one that sometimes think. So if you just imagine, again, we're on the bar, our arms are out wide, our elbows only bend and straighten like this. But if we put kind of force inside like that, we can put stress kind of to the inside part of our elbows. Well, sometimes we'll see clients with kind of medial elbow pain if the bars are a little too wide, as well as if you're out at an angle like that, and the force kind of comes in if you're, navigating terrain. So elbow would be another one, and then we can kind of work our way up to the shoulders themselves. If you're reaching way too far for that handlebar, especially really wide, that's going to cause your shoulder blades to kind of protract or kind of reach forward, and that sometimes kind of puts you in a little bit more vulnerable position for both the shoulder and the upper back. Sometimes it'll cause you to bound forward at your upper back. So these are all kind of like possibilities. I'm not saying that's every case or anything like that, but those are kind of the pros and the cons of what we would tend to see oftentimes with the wider gravel bar.
So is there any way to kind of mitigate those things? Let's say someone's committed to going wide. It sounds as if they can't just have the same stem. Can they mitigate some of those issues by shortening the stem, or like what other, or would you move the saddle position forward to kind of, place more weight on the seat?
Yeah, probably if it were me, it would be all about shortening stem. I probably wouldn't move saddle around at all, because then you're going to start affecting kind of the back side of the bike, or kind of the knees and the hips and the lower back. We kind of want to maintain that kind of position as good. And then, but yeah, the main thing would just be shortening that stem. Just like you said, it's almost like triangulation. I think we talked about this a little bit too, where it's just like, if you measure that, we've got two angles that we know, or if we know two or three things on a right triangle, we can basically kind of figure out the third angle. So if the tip of saddle to hood is one measurement, and then your distance from the center of the bar to the edge, there's your 90-degree angle. So you've got that angle, and you got the 90-degree mark. You know how wide the bar is. You can figure out kind of the difference in stem length that way too. Or like I said, there's like right angle, triangle calculators that you can use. Kind of,
Maths.
yeah. Let's go back to math. Sometimes that doesn't quite add up perfect. We can't get a 0.7 difference in millimeters or something like that we need. But that's the generalized idea. The wider you go, you're just going to need to shorten that stem up. And
right.
That's kind of the main thing you would want to go with that. The other thing that I'll bring up a little bit too, that I think that has not been brought up with the wider gravel bar phenomenon, is the positioning of the hoods and the brakes themselves. With these flared bars, we're seeing a lot of people sometimes getting, again, wrist hand pain, because a lot of times, depending on how much flare, they're really orienting those brake levers just right along that same way. So they're really pointed in like that. And if you were to ride on that bike for a prolonged period of time, sometimes that extra rotation can sometimes put more torque on your wrist. And that also becomes more evident the more kind of gnarly stuff that you're going through, because the steeper, the more you have to turn that bar, the more that already, if that thing is already angled in, your wrist is now kinked even more. And sometimes you're not even able to access the brake. So we tend to say, this is all bar specific, but we try to orient the brake levers a little bit more vertical as we can, if we can. So a lot of times they just follow the angle of that, and that's great if you're in here, but we try to kind of orient them down a little bit more. And sometimes when we get those a little bit more vertical, you won't be able to actually pull the brakes without hitting the bar itself. So you have to kind of play with that a little bit, but that's another thing that we tend to look at with this whole wider bar, flared bar, is the position of the hood.
So what it sounds like is, in some ways, if you take a wide gravel handlebar and put it on, let's say, like a traditional geometry road bike, that it might be kind of ill-equipped, and to get the best optimization of the wide handlebar, there might actually have to be like an overall change in the bike's geometry. Just so, you don't need like a stupid short stem, maybe the head angle looks like more like a mountain bike to kind of compensate for that wider handlebar.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like I said, and plus, if you've got a bike with a very narrow wheelbase, these road bikes, you'd never want something like that, because they're already super twitchy. So you get super, that's kind of would be the trade-off there. So, yeah.
I assume that you've done lots of fittings for folks that do gravel endurance events. Is there uh, do you approach their fit sessions different from someone that's just riding a regular road bike?
Like I said, it all kind of depends on the individual person. Like I said, that we're all each so unique individuals, and someone who is an endurance athlete, they're coming in with knee pain. The one thing that I can share with you though is that typically when we're having pain on the bike, we're having, or as we say, if you're suffering from pain, like I said, cycling inherently is about suffering. So we say if you're suffering with pain, that's okay.
Yeah.
If you're suffering from pain, that's not okay. But it's all based on time. So if we get an ultra endurance athlete that comes in and they're doing gravel, they're doing whatever, and they say to me, boy, I start getting a little bit of some medial knee pain at mile 70. The amount of change that we need to make to that person's bike fit is very small. It's millimeters of movement, just because that person has taken thousands and thousands of repetition, and then all of a sudden now we're actually getting symptoms. So it's something very tiny. It's that analogy of like, I'm going to take my fingernail and scratch my skin, and I'm just going to do that maybe 100 times. That might be fine, but if I do that 10,000 times, you'll actually break through the surface of that skin and cause pain. That's kind of how bike fit is, because especially when we're clipped in, whether you're in a good spot or a bad spot, you're kind of stuck, and that's just kind of where that repetition will happen. So if somebody comes in and let's say they're getting symptoms within 5 minutes, we get people come in, they're like, my back is on fire within 5 minutes. Typically, we're going to get them up. There's going to be some pretty drastic things that we're going to need to change. But as far as differences in fit, it all comes down to what can the person handle, what is their unique body, what are their asymmetries, and then we take that, we just kind of reverse engineer that back towards the bike fit as well, and what their goals are. So if their goal is speed, things like that, we're going to try to get them a little bit lower on the front to be able to help with aerodynamics or things of that nature too. So there's not like a hard and fast rule between mountain bike versus these. I mean, there are pieces, parts that we have to deal with that are different, adjustability of, dropper posts or something like that. But for the most part, everybody's positioning, we want to put people in a neutral position. And then once they're starting to push into speed, we can start kind of towing the line of what their flexibility can handle and tolerate.
So we had talked, we had chatted a little bit earlier, and you have a Breadwinner G Road, right?
Yes, sir.
And
actually, I might add, yeah.
One of the first, yeah.
That bike started out as you had to enter into it quickly. And then it was like, I think it was in October. It was like 30 days to enter in to get this fancy Breadwinner with the Eaglehart fork. And so, yeah, so I jumped on that.
There you go. And you have plans to do Dirty Kansas this year. Hopefully, the situation.
Yeah.
Hopefully, things will resolve itself, and you'll get to ride.
Yeah.
Were there any differences in how you set, that bike up as opposed to? I don't know if you have a road bike, but like, would you make any tweaks between the two?
Not really. A lot of times, if you're going to be looking at, a lot of times the measurements that you're going to take or try to pass on from one bike to the next. So each bike's going to feel different, mostly just because of frame design, frame geometry, steepness of the tubes, all this stuff. The thing that's really not going to change, as long as you have the same length crank in between bikes, is essentially your bottom bracket to top of saddle height. I mean, that measurement is going to be kind of the same, whether that's gravel bike, whether that's road bike, et cetera, et cetera. When we start to kind of move toward the front end, that kind of becomes a little bit more, like I said, tolerance, speed, but not really. No, your saddle height should be roughly about the same. The bike is going to feel different just because a lot of times the tube angles are a little slacker sometimes, on the gravel bike versus the road bike. But for the most part, not really. The interesting thing is you can have the height be identical and get on this bike and be like, wow, this is so much taller. Until you kind of start settling into it and you're like, oh, it's because that seat tube is 72 versus something a little slacker. So yeah, but the only thing that would be different on the gravel bike, of course, would be the wider bar, flared bar, things that I'm running one by. So I guess we can talk about a little bit of the differences a lot of times between, let's say, a one by setup versus let's say a double chainring or a triple chainring. Is it's going to affect width of stance. Sometimes we'll get riders that are really keen on a road bike, very comfortable with that, and then all of a sudden they get a one by, and a lot of times that will put them much more narrow, just a narrow setup of that idea. So sometimes we actually have to modify cleats to allow them to be in a little bit more as well. This would be something that we would kind of look at, because oftentimes if you're pinched in a little too tight, that sometimes can cause like IT band pain or kind of lateral hip pain, things like that too. So that'd be the only thing that you may want to play around with it, but that's not really necessarily the bike itself. That's more the one by versus the double or the triple chainring. The same thing goes with people that have a triple chainring. A lot of times they're already spaced so wide. We need to bring the feet in a little bit more just to kind of get them to line up a little bit too. So yeah.
So let's say someone goes the wide bar route. Is there like what indicators should they look for that they may have gone too wide? Let's say.
Yeah. So it'd be pain kind of at all those extremities. So wrist pain, hand pain would be number one. Neck pain would probably be number two, and then possibly upper back symptoms would be another one. Yep. Or like I said, or fatigue. You're going to have to build kind of more chest because you're going to use that for a little bit more of that width. But if you've gone too far, you're going to probably start getting unusual pains, wrist, hand, neck. I think would probably be your main things that you want to look for.
So how wide are your bars set up on your G Road?
Right now I've got the 42, and I think I've got the Thompson gravel bar on that, which I think is 11 degree. I'm not quite sure exactly, but I love that bar. Although I'm very curious about the Shaka bar. I kind of want to check that one out. I think that's 53. So, like I said, I just haven't gotten a chance to try out a lot of these ultra wide things. I definitely love a little bit of flare. I've gotten so comfortable with that. I almost kind of want to put that flared bar on my road bike a little bit. It's just so comfortable. I'm like, I'm an old dad, I need not all about it being tight and aerodynamic. Just make it comfortable.
Yeah. Do you have any other thoughts on this wide gravel bar trend? Are you excited about it? Do you think it's going to cause more problems, or is it just another great option?
Yeah, I like it just because it's new. It's different. I love things when it's just kind of uncharted water, especially when it comes to the bike fit world. For us, we're always kind of making clinical decisions based on symptoms and that. So for me, it's great because there's just not a rhyme or reason about this bar's too far. Like I said, if you're upright enough and you've got the bars close enough, you can go super wide. And I guess we just have Ron to thank for all that, I guess. But but I love it. I think it's fun. And like I said, I love gravel. Gravel's my passion. That's just what I want to be doing all the time anyway. So any advancements or changes, I love all that stuff, man.
We've done a couple of videos on bike fit on the channel. A lot of people are still fairly new to the concept. Who do you think should get a bike fit? Is it just for people that race? And for those that maybe don't have the funds to go right away, like are there any like broad general guidelines so people can get a rough fit at home?
I think to answer your first question is that really if you're going to ride your bike a decent amount, so if you're going to commute, if you're going to ride based on time, you should probably get a bike fit. I mean, it's a very low hanging fruit that can make such a huge bang for your buck. For the new riders especially, bike fit is for everyone. I mean, I started out, I was a bike commuter, just riding 3 or 4 miles every day, and my neck started hurting, my back started hurting. And so that's what prompted me as a physical therapist to be like, what the heck's going on with my neck? Why am I getting pain? What is happening? And it was one time I was at the shop one time talking to these guys, and they were raising my bars because I got neck pain. I was like, man, well, what do you think's going on with my neck? And they're just like, how the heck should I know? I'm not a physical therapist, but generalized rules are, we always ask people, like, well, should I get a bike fit? I was like, well, are you riding? And they're like, yeah. And I was like, are you riding as far as you want, as much as you want, and not having pain? And they're like, yeah. And I was like, well, then you're fine. For me, it's all based on symptoms. And as people start to ride more, they're going to start riding longer distances. That's sometimes when we'll start teasing out the nuances of bike fit is going to start to show up by the more time that you're on that. So it's a little simple cleat adjustment, a little rotation of the cleat here and there can make a huge difference. But really, bike fit is for everyone. And that's kind of the neat thing about us, as we see tons of commuters. We also see elite level road cyclists, elite level gravel cyclists, the 24-hour guys that do 529 miles in 48 hours. We see everybody. So it's just such a nice way. But everybody, if you love cycling and you want to get out and ride more and you're not doing as much as you'd like, or you're nervous about a bike fit, it's going to be a great, not only just in the adjustments that we can make, but just in the education that we can give you about all the simple stuff, cadence and pedaling and shifting and all that too. So as far as basic bike fit, yeah, I mean, I always kind of say, get on the bike. I think the key thing that we always tell people is that you don't want to have your knee all the way straight at the bottom of the pedal stroke when you're pedaling. I think that's one of those things that people hear about that and they're like, well, I thought, it just makes sense. Like your knee goes all the way straight, so you should reach. You should actually have about a 30 to a 35 degree knee bend at the bottom of the pedal stroke. That's always kind of key. You always want to be pushing with the ball of your foot, not the center of your foot, not the heel of your foot. The ball of your foot is the best kind of lever arm to be pushing through. And so when we're orienting cleats or something of that nature, we always want to orient the ball of the foot over the center of the pedal. When you're sitting on the bike, also, you want to try to keep your back flat. flat, so not really rounded forward, but not rounded backwards either. Sometimes people go too far in each direction. I try to think about almost the kind of the lower part of the pelvis as like the lower part of a soda can, the trunk or kind of the lower part of the rib cage as the upper part of the soda can, and just like contents under pressure, you want to make sure that they're parallel to one another. If you're hyperextended in your upper back, that's going to put torque on things. So just think of keeping things almost like a cylinder at your trunk. Commonly, we tend to see people that want to roll their pelvis backwards, whether that's saddle discomfort, et cetera, et cetera. That puts your back in a very vulnerable position and makes you a little bit more prone to back pain. Like we talked about with shoulders, you want their shoulders at roughly about 90 degrees or less. And that's with a little bend in the elbows and keeping the shoulders down. Most people want to kind of shrug those shoulders up towards their ears.
Right.
So kind of coach them about keeping the shoulders in the sockets, shoulder blades down and back, lifting up with the chest, chin stays down, all those type of positioning. But that's kind of where we would look at for all the bike fits for kind of any bike, really.
The last bit you're describing, it sounds like there is some mechanical things you can change, but there's also maybe some adaptations a rider has to do in terms of like their general posture on the bike to kind of really optimize the fit.
Well, I mean, and like I said, who's the best expert in understanding adaptability, training stimulus and responses, but your physical therapist. I mean, that's kind of the thing is like we kind of understand how tissues adapt, how tissues move. That maybe your first time on this ride, probably not going to feel super great because it's a brand new position for you, but within this amount of time, that tissue will adapt. These are your parameters you want to stay within, and to give them a little guidance on that. So, I mean, that's, like I said, it all comes back to cycling in general is composed of, 90% rider, 10% bike and equipment. So we got to focus on the rider, man. I mean, that's kind of the rider. We got no cycling.
Well, thanks so much, Kevin, for all your great advice. If you are in Portland and want to get a bike fit or want to ask Kevin more questions about this, you can follow him on Instagram at pedal PT. Is that right?
Pedal PT and pedal_PT, both. Yeah. So,
okay.
Yep.
And if you like this content, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and as always, keep the supple side down.